Hello, I'm Lee Brown and you're watching AnewZ. Let's take a look at today's top stories. An astonishing U-turn from Donald Trump as he backs Ukraine to retake all its occupied territory. The European Commission president says she wants Europe to stop buying Russian oil by the end of the year. And 15 people have been killed in Taiwan as storm Ragasa barrels through East Asia. We start at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, where the US President Donald Trump delivered a fiery address. For almost an hour, the president took aim at his opponents, warning world leaders about illegal migration, climate policies he dismissed as a scam, and the threat of war. Our Ube Shabanda has more.
President Donald Trump took the United Nations by storm on Tuesday, warning world leaders that their countries could be going to hell if they did not take care to stop the flow of illegal migrants and ensure border security and pursue sensible energy policies. President Trump called climate change the great green scam, saying that it was an attempt by countries in the less developed world that pollute the most to try to move and redistribute industrial capacity from the developed world. President Trump warned Western Europe that the unique nature of their country could face serious threats if they do not follow his administration's policy and pursue border security and stop the flow of millions of illegal migrants into their countries. President Trump also heavily criticized the United Nations for not sufficiently supporting his peace initiatives, including the historical peace summit in the White House that brought the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia to a final conclusion. President Trump also made major waves following his meeting with Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, praising the Ukrainian leader and telling the press that he believed that Ukraine could, in fact, win the war against the Russian military. President Trump said that Vladimir Putin had brought economic ruin to his country and that he believed that Ukraine has a chance at defeating the Russian war machine. That is a major shift from President Trump's previous positions. We also saw the American president heavily criticize illegal drug cartels, saying that his administration would continue to fight designated foreign terror organizations that were attempting to bring drugs from South America into the United States. So President Trump highlighting a number of economic successes and diplomatic initiatives, while at the same time essentially saying that the United Nations was broken as an institution. And we are also expecting President Trump to meet with President Erdogan of Turkey this week. That is expected to be a major meeting. And President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan is in New York, and he held a number of bilateral meetings, including meetings with senior business leaders here in New York. So the UN General Assembly is off to a big start here, with major headlines being created by the American president. And we are also expecting President Trump to continue to focus on the issue of Gaza. He told the General Assembly that he wants Hamas to immediately release all the remaining hostages in captivity to bring the war to an end. And President Trump also heavily criticized attempts by some countries to unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine. Trump saying that doing so would only simply reward Hamas for the atrocities of October 7th. I'm Ube Shabander, AnewZ, New York.
Remaining on the topic, earlier we were joined by John Kavalich, senior editor at Issue Insight in New York, who said Donald Trump's speech was strong but scattered, mixing grievances and unexpected remarks with some legitimate points on issues like immigration and energy.
You know, as an analyst, you certainly try to take notes, and my hands are cramping from just the amount of interesting statements he said. I'm going to guess that if you were in the audience, if you at the UNGA listening to President Trump, you were probably getting out a calculator and determining how many days left for this guy. And it turns out 1,462 days that the second term of President Trump will be over. This was about grievances, not unexpected. If the teleprompter had been working, we can sort of begin to imagine what might have transpired if he had had that benefit as well. He was all over. I mean, when we have a speech from the President of the United States, the UNGA, that goes from Sharia law in London to I'm not bragging or braggadocious, but I'm always right, to going after President Lula of Brazil, but then saying, well, he's my best friend. I just saw him in the hall. We're going to get together next week, and then continue to lay into him. It was all over the place. Having said that, though, he does have the capacity, which he used today and which he has used in the past, where he does raise legitimate issues, as legitimate would be defined by most people. And immigration is one, energy is one, where there are components within his statements, as outrageous as the statements may be, where you will say, yeah, that makes sense, but I wish you would just stop there as opposed to keep going and trying to explain it.
Just to bring you some breaking news now, the Kremlin has warned that Trump's idea that Ukraine can retake occupied territory is deeply mistaken. On Tuesday, in a game-changing U-turn to foreign policy, President Donald Trump pivoted from pressing Ukraine to surrender territory to suggesting it's able to win all its land back. Trump's called Russia's campaign, quote, aimless. But the Kremlin has responded said such an idea is deeply mistaken, and further pushing back on Trump's comments, added that its invasion of Ukraine was not an aimless war. It also added that the process of normalizing relations with Washington was moving much slower than it had happened or hoped.
US President Donald Trump now believes Ukraine can reclaim all land lost to Russia with the help of the European Union and NATO support. He made the comment on Truth Social after meeting Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City on Tuesday. He also called Russia's campaign aimless and described it as a paper tiger, saying Moscow's weakening economy made this the time for Kyiv to act. His remarks signal a dramatic reversal from his earlier calls for Kyiv to make concessions in order to end the war. In February, he clashed with Zelensky in a heated Oval Office exchange, telling the Ukrainian leader he didn't have the cards to win. And just last month, Trump gave Russian President Vladimir Putin a high-profile welcome in Alaska. Zelensky called Trump's new stance a big shift, saying the US president could be a game changer in the conflict.
If he will be sure in Ukraine, and I think that he is more close now to this situation, and that's why, and between us, only Trump can. For today, we know some not too much players in the world who can be game changers, but he's the most closer to this.
Trump also toughened his stance on Moscow, saying NATO nations should shoot down Russian jets that violate their airspace.
Staying with the conflict, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has pushed for the international community to act towards ending the war in Ukraine and criticized China's inaction as he addressed the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for action in ending the war as he addressed the United Nations Security Council gathering on Tuesday.
We must admit the world's attention to the UN is fading. The organization has less influence, and too often there is a lack of real decisions on fundamental issues. This is exactly what we need to speak about today, about the tools that sadly are not working now. But they will work, I'm sure. They will work if you are active, if we are active.
He also pressed for Russia to negotiate for peace and said he had met with U.S. President Donald Trump and discussed a few good ideas to advance peace. He also argued that China has the power to pressure Russia to end the war, but said the country has remained largely inactive. China's deputy ambassador said Beijing has remained impartial, calling for a ceasefire and political talks while pursuing diplomatic and peace efforts. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio underlined that President Trump has devoted significant effort to securing an agreement, but warned his patience is limited.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end.
Russia's deputy ambassador, meanwhile, dismissed the session as little more than a staged platform, insisting it added nothing of value to the peace process, while stating that if others are serious about peace, Moscow is ready to engage. The debate revealed deep divisions, yet a common refrain: the war must end, though how to get there remains starkly contested.
Looking at the dialogue of leaders at the United Nations General Assembly, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said she backs Trump's plea for Europe to end its reliance on Russian oil by the end of the year. Speaking on the sidelines with US President Donald Trump, von der Leyen echoed his stance on energy security. In a meeting in New York, von der Leyen said, quote, "Trump is absolutely right. We're on it."
President Trump is absolutely right. We're on it. We have reduced already massively the gas supply from Russia, completely gotten out of Russian coal, and massively also reduced the oil supply, but there's still some coming to the European continent. So what we do now, we put sanctions out to those ports where, for example, LNG is coming from Russia. And we want to put tariffs on oil supplies that are still coming to the Europe.
Now, at least 15 people have died and dozens are missing in Taiwan's Hualien County after a barrier lake burst during Super Typhoon Ragasa. The storm has also battered Hong Kong and Macau, forcing school closures and widespread transport suspensions.
The Super Typhoon Ragasa has battered eastern Taiwan with heavy rain and strong winds, flooding towns, washing away bridges, and leaving streets covered in mud and debris. The storm, one of the strongest this year, has caused widespread damage in Hualien County, where a barrier lake overflowed on Tuesday afternoon. Taiwan's town of Guangfu later saw floodwaters sweeping through streets, destroying a major road bridge and dragging vehicles and debris along with it. Fire officials confirmed that all 15 people who were killed and at least 17 who remain missing are from Guangfu. Rescue teams and 340 military personnel were dispatched, with soldiers using armoured vehicles to deliver water and supplies door to door.
My refrigerator was floating inside the shop like a sailboat. My car was also drifting like a toy car.
Residents described the flooding as sudden and overwhelming.
The first floor was flooded and the glass was covered by mud. We couldn't open the door, so my brother broke the window to rescue my mother.
The government said the overflow released about 60 million tonnes of water from an estimated 91 million tonnes held in the natural barrier lake, enough to fill roughly 36,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Soldiers and rescue workers continued efforts to reach stranded villages and provide aid, while mudslides and blocked roads slowed relief operations. Ragasa has also lashed Hong Kong and Macau with hurricane-force winds and torrential rain. Both regions raised their highest typhoon signals early Wednesday, prompting widespread transport suspensions and school closures.
In a strongly worded speech, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has sharply condemned Israel's actions in Gaza, rejecting claims of war and instead calling it a policy of occupation, genocide and mass murder. Erdogan urged for an immediate ceasefire and unimpeded humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip.
Gazze'de bir savaş yoktur. Gazze'de iki taraftan söz edilemez. There is no war in Gaza. There are no two sides in Gaza. On one side in Gaza is the regular army, armed with the most modern and lethal weapons, and on the other there are innocent civilians, innocent children. This is not a fight against terrorism. This is a policy of occupation, deportation, exile, genocide. Indeed, a policy of mass murder, all carried out by using the October 7th incident as an excuse. A ceasefire in Gaza must be achieved immediately. Attacks must cease, and humanitarian aid must certainly be allowed to flow unhindered. We must ensure that the genocide crew is held accountable under international law. God willing, this will undoubtedly happen.
İnşallah bu mutlaka.
Welcome back to AnewZ. Several European nations, including France, have recognized a Palestinian state at the UN, coordinated with Saudi Arabia in a bid to revive the hopes of a two-state solution amid the Gaza war. Macron said right must prevail over might, framing it as a gamble that pits Europe against US dominance in the peace process. Israel condemned the move as rewarding Hamas for the October 7th attacks, with some Israeli ministers urging annexation of the West Bank. Trump's administration backed Israel, barred Palestinian Authority President Abbas from attending the UN conference in person, and dismissed the European plan, exposing one of the deepest rifts between Washington and Europe on the conflict. Saudi Arabia and the Arab League pressed Hamas to disarm and hand authority to the Palestinian Authority. And some countries are more reluctant to recognize a Palestinian state straight anyway. Now, Turkey's President Erdogan accused Israel of genocide, urging global action while addressing the United Nations General Assembly. On the ground, Gaza faces collapsing hospitals, fuel shortages, and mass displacement as Israel intensifies its assault nearly 2 years after October 7th. Joining me now to unpack these latest developments is Dr. Yusuf Bahadir Keskin from Amasya, Turkey. Doctor, I want to start with what we've heard just related to Erdogan's speech. What's your reaction to such a strongly and graphic worded remarks?
We know Erdogan's sensitivity about Palestine and Gaza. Also, it's not the first time we see it. Also, Erdogan's sensitivity about Palestine and Gaza did not start at October 7. It's older. If you remember, last week, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a statement about Turkey and Erdogan. He said he asked Prime Minister Mesut Yilmaz at that time for a historical tablet about Israel's history, but he explained that Prime Minister Mesut Yilmaz did not give it because he was careful about Istanbul's Mayor Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It was very interesting in Israel's politics and Turkish politics also. So this sensitivity has always been in Recep Tayyip Erdogan's political codes, always. It's not a new thing. Politically, economically, or military costs, even if there are some costs, Erdogan takes a stand on Palestine issue. So, in fact, not only about Gaza, but also Syria is a serious topic for Erdogan in United Nations Council. I think now it's the time to solve these problems in Gaza, in Syria, in Ukraine, even in Azerbaijan, Armenia. The region needs this. The region needs to solve its problem because it's really tight in past a few years, I think.
Well, I'm glad you touched on the other conflicts there, because we've seen Turkey position itself as a mediator for the exchange of prisoners, for instance, between Ukraine and Russia. Now, with such strong remarks coming from Erdogan regarding the Gaza conflict, could Turkey position itself as a mediator? I've asked this question to several guests before, but I want to get your take on this as well.
Actually, today Turkey has a position as a mediator between the war and Russia and Ukraine. So it's very important position for the war, for European countries, for United States, for any other countries in the world, African countries, Middle East countries. But the trouble in Palestine and Gaza, it's different. What's the difference? So we know that in this century, in modern time, we are watching a genocide. So any countries, not only Turkey, not only United States, every country must show a strong reaction to stop it. But now we look at many of these countries cannot speak about it, Luis. So today and yesterday, we saw in United Nations Council there is a systematic problem in the world. So the role of mediator countries are raising in the world. Today, we look, today more than 150 countries recognize Palestine as a state, almost as many as those who recognize Israel also. But we look, Israel is a member of United Nations, but Palestine cannot be. This is not fair. So, in fact, the system of United Nations is not fair, and it's not inclusive. The United Nations almost never finds a solution to big problems in the world. Today, look at Gaza and Syria. Please look at Russia and Ukraine war today. Or yesterday in the history, please check the war in Karabakh, the war in the genocide.
I do want to stay on the war. I do want to stay on the question of Palestinian statehood here. I do apologize for interrupting you there. But it is a good point you touched on about the issue of division in the United Nations and the difficulties. I mean, Donald Trump himself said that the United Nations is effectively not working as it should, or effectively at all. Now, we've seen countries like Italy coming out saying they want guarantees of hostages returned. How does this stress the division of recognizing Palestinian statehood among significant countries?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I couldn't understand.
Italy has laid out the groundwork that they will not recognize a Palestinian state until the hostages are returned and until Hamas is no longer in power or has any transition of power. What's your reaction to that? How hard is that going to be for the UN and other countries to overcome?
United Nations, European Union can hardly act together on any issue. Today we see on the member, the Istanbul of Italy. So the European Union is an economic giant, but a military or political dwarf, we can call it. They are divided even on the Russia-Ukraine issue, and they cannot move together on Gaza and Palestine either. The issue of hostages is just an excuse. Are there any hostages in the West Bank? Or does Mahmoud Abbas hold any hostages? So many countries.
I do have to challenge you on that, though. I'm sorry, I do have to challenge. This saying the hostages is an excuse. Are you saying that the war in Gaza would have happened irrespective of the October 7th attacks?
I want to say many European countries, many countries in European Union are not sincere on this. They follow the pressure of United States of America. They follow Israel, or they fear of them, the governments I'm talking about. But of course, not all of Europe is like this. We must keep countries like Spain or Ireland or some other European countries. All reasonable people should thank them. I also thank from here both Spanish government or Prime Minister Sanchez and all the people around the world who support Gaza with coincidence. But about the hostages, I don't think Hamas will be affected by this. The statement in United Nations or the statement by Trump, this is my opinion on the hostage issue. For many countries in Europe, this also becomes an excuse, I said. Trump's United Nations speech I listened it was far from the real reasons for the problem. He still says only October 7th, and he only talks about the hostage. But On the other side, he never talked about 70,000 people have died in Gaza. They killed. They are fighting with mental and physical problems. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, children, women, they were injured by the attacks of Israel. Also, today we look to the plans of Netanyahu and Trump, to the problem in Gaza. They are planning 2 million people are condemned to hunger, or they are planning to move 2 million people to the other parts of Gaza. Also, this is a humanity crime as well. But we listen to Donald Trump. He just talks about nothing except 20 hostages of Hamas. I think this is not fair. This is not merciful. Also, I think this is my personal opinion. Donald Trump cannot be the referee in this issue because Trump is a side. He is on Israel's side. He is not neutral. He's not a mediator. Also, he stopped United Nations to work fair. If these systems keep going, United Nations systems, they cannot find any solution on Gaza issue or any other issue in the world, I want to say it.
Well, I want to highlight one thing in this conversation, is that the US is the most significant country that hasn't recognized Palestinian statehood. Does that go and show the supremacy of the US in organizations like the UN? So it's not equal. What would your take on that be?
Actually, the position of United Nations is not equal. It's true that the United Nations is a very powerful country. It's the most powerful country in the world. It has the biggest economy. It's the strongest ally of Israel. They can officially tell this also. It also has influence in many international organizations. But being important does not mean fair or always right. We know other countries and regions also have growing power. So I think they must be a part of this trouble. We know United States or United Nations cannot build a solution to Israel's offense, not only in Palestine, not only in Gaza, but also in all of the Middle East. We saw that in Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria. We can find a solution with real politics. So we need to invite other global powers to be a part of this trouble. I think this is the solution.
Will, I just want to focus there. Israel would suggest that it's acting in self-defense against the Hamas fighters. And Hamas, many would say, are operating in tunnels, and Israel have come out saying they're operating in tunnels and using what many would say is also human shields in Gaza. Netanyahu said that phrase himself. What do you make of that? What's your reaction to that? This is a cost of war, many in Israel would suggest.
Actually, the cost of war for Palestinian people is very high. And also, I don't call it as a war, I don't call it as a conflict. I call it as a modern genocide. Yes, Netanyahu and his cabinet calls this is only defending itself, but this is not just defense. To bombing homes, to bombing schools and hospitals is not self-defense. Yes, the tunnels are often used in this war, yet most of the attacks hit civilians in Gaza above the ground, not fighters in tunnels against Hamas. So for Israel, for another normal country, true defense should protect civilian people, to protect children, not punish millions of civilians. Israel calls its actions self-defense, but this is not self-defense. This is not defense. So real defense means stopping attacks, not destroying whole cities, not destroying whole buildings or civilians. They talk many times about hostages. They talk about tunnels. They talk about Hamas members. But most of the bombs fall on houses, on markets or refugee camps. Children and families are dying. They are not fighters. They are not in tunnels. I think self-defense cannot mean starving millions of people, 2 million people. It cannot mean blocking medicine, water, electricity. I think this is punishment. This is not protection. And punishment of a whole population, all civilians, it can never be called defense. So we know in just these 2 days, any power, any country, or any international organization cannot stop powerful countries to do this. They cannot stop. I think in next days, international organization or some powerful countries or some global actors can stop this fight, I think.
Well, sadly, we have run out of time there, Doctor, but I do want to thank you for joining us and sharing your insights today, and I hope to have a chat with you again soon. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good afternoon.
Welcome back to AnewZ. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Now, Iran and key European powers held last-ditch negotiations on Tuesday on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly to try to prevent the reimposition of UN sanctions before a September 27th deadline. Foreign ministers from France, Britain and Germany and EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas met with Iran's delegation to discuss the future of Tehran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ruled out direct talks with the US, calling them a, quote, dead end, and said Tehran would not yield on uranium enrichment. The comments came as US President Donald Trump told the General Assembly that Iran, quote, can never be allowed to obtain nuclear weapons. Turning to Central Asia, Kazakhstan has finalized $5.2 billion worth of investment deals with the United States during President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's visit to New York, marking a major boost to the country's economic ties with Washington. 11 agreements and memorandums were signed between Kazakh and American companies ranging across transport, logistics, energy and IT. The deals follow Tokayev's earlier trip to China, where he secured $15 billion across 70 agreements.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here.
Staying in the region, Uzbekistan and the US have signed 10 multi-million-dollar business agreements. The two countries struck deals with Uzbek and American partners across aviation, mining, healthcare, finance, and geological exploration. The deal involved prominent companies including Boeing and Citigroup. This comes as Uzbekistan President Shavkat Mirziyoyev met with Donald Trump in New York and discussed key regional and global issues. The president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, has held a series of meetings during his visit at the UN headquarters in New York. Aliyev met with the presidents of Finland, Kenya and Iraq, the Prime Minister of Greece and the Secretary General of the Council of Europe to discuss issues like diplomacy, energy and infrastructure.
The UN General Assembly is in full swing in New York, with world leaders holding bilateral meetings and making key statements. At this moment, New York stands as a great place for boosting bilateral connections in the geopolitical worlds. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has also been active on the sidelines, meeting with several counterparts and international officials. First of them is Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. President Aliyev met with him on Tuesday and discussed energy cooperation and agreed to expand ties in trade and tourism. The Greek leader also highlighted the importance of the Washington meeting for regional peace. Alongside Greece, bilateral cooperation was also in the spotlight during President Aliyev's meeting with Iraqi President Abdul Latif Jamal Rashid. The meeting addressed developing relations between Azerbaijan and Iraq, as well as cooperation in energy, tourism and other fields. Additionally, they exchanged views on cooperation within the UN, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the non-aligned movement, and other institutions. Kenya-Azerbaijan relations also gained visibility during President Aliyev's New York visit. Ilham Aliyev and his Kenyan counterpart welcomed the positive momentum in ties, noting that the opening of Azerbaijan's embassy in Kenya gave new impetus to bilateral cooperation. Energy, agriculture, and industry, as well as cooperation within international organizations, were on the agenda for two leaders. OSCE's dissolved Minsk Group was once again on the agenda in New York. President Ilham Aliyev met with Finnish President Alexander Stubb and recalled that during Finland's OSCE chairmanship, the decision to dissolve the Minsk Group was made. Aliyev stressed Azerbaijan and Armenia have now entered a period of peace. Relations with Europe are also in the spotlight for Azerbaijan. In his meeting with the Council of Europe's Secretary-General Alain Berset, President Aliyev discussed the Washington Declaration, the dissolution of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe Minsk Group, and future cooperation with European institutions. Berset recalled his visit to Azerbaijan during COP29 and expressed readiness to continue cooperation.
Remaining in the political arena, Azerbaijan and Turkey have taken another step forward in strengthening their cooperation in the field of education. A bilateral meeting between the ministries of the two countries was at Garabağ University in the city of Kankandi.
Azerbaijan and Turkey advanced their education cooperation with a bilateral meeting at Garabağ University in Kankandi. The high-level meeting brought together Azerbaijan's Minister of Science and Education Emin Emrulayev and Turkey's Minister of National Education Yusuf Tekin. Discussions highlighted the dynamic and successful development of Azerbaijan-Turkey relations in the education sector in recent years. Following the talks, two important documents were signed: the additional protocol to the agreement on cooperation in the field of education, originally signed in 2017, and the additional protocol to the protocol on cooperation in vocational education between the two governments. Officials stressed that these agreements will further deepen ties in general and vocational education, opening up new opportunities for academic collaboration and exchange between the two brotherly nations.
Turkey and the United Nations World Food Programme are stepping up their cooperation to address global food insecurity. Talks were held on the sidelines of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly in New York. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with World Food Programme Executive Director Cindy McCain to discuss Turkey's key role in the organization's global work, thanks to its strategic location and advanced logistical infrastructure. Both sides also discussed plans to position Turkey as a strategic stockpile and logistics hub for WFP operations worldwide. Officials noted that this shared commitment marks another milestone in advancing Turkey's cooperation with the UN system. Now, the Secretary-General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Wakemle Mene, has visited Azerbaijan for high-level talks. His visit focused on exploring partnerships to make public services more accessible to citizens using technology and expanding cooperation between Africa and the South Caucasus. In an interview exclusive to AnewZ, he touched upon the spheres for future cooperation.
And on this occasion, we met with Hassan to discuss an arrangement of collaboration on the digital economy and digitization, particularly digitization of government services. As you know, Hassan has a very, very successful and effective digitalization strategy, which many countries around the world are looking at very, very closely with a view to modeling it for their own improvement and efficiency of government services. So we had a very good discussion there, and we also had discussions that focused on trade and investment relations between Azerbaijan and the African continent. I hope that an outcome of this meeting will be a collaboration arrangement on the digital economy, on digitization, between the AFCFTA Secretariat and Hassan under the presidency.
Welcome back. Beyond multilateral discussions and gatherings on the world's most pressing issues, the 80th session of the UN General Assembly has also witnessed a number of countries signing multi-billion-dollar deals and forging new economic ties. During President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's working visit to New York, 11 agreements and deals were signed between Kazakh and American companies, with investments amounting to $5.2 billion. Uzbekistan, too, has sealed a number of important agreements enhancing its international business credentials, most notably an $8 billion agreement between Uzbekistan Airways and Boeing, announced by US President Donald Trump. Joining us to examine some of the key partnerships forged and evaluate their wider significance, particularly in the context of US-China competition, a theme not so absent from President Trump's address to the Assembly, is Andrew K.P. Leung, international and independent China strategist based in Hong Kong. Welcome, Andrew, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
During his earlier visit to China, President Tokayev signed 70 agreements worth $15 billion. Now, on the sidelines of the UNGA, Kazakh firms have signed deals worth $5.2 billion with US companies, some suggesting the actual total might be higher. How important are these deals for Kazakh's growing economic and attractiveness and prestige?
Well, Kazakhstan, of course, is a key state in the middle corridor, connecting China's manufacturing and trading hub across Central Asia to Eastern Europe, bypassing more troublesome areas in Russia and through Central Asia to Azerbaijan, and then to Turkey, to Eastern Europe, and then to Eastern Europe. So I think that this is also an example of the importance of connectivity, infrastructure connectivity, trade connectivity, people-to-people connectivity, and then digital connectivity in the age defined by the fourth and the fifth industrial revolution. This stands in stark contrast with, I think, President Trump's more recent unilateral coercion, using American power to bully countries across the world. Not only is a perceived existential threat, for example, countries like China and Russia, but also its allies and other countries around the world. So I think that this connectivity is even more important to put the world order back into a more fruitful and productive mode, even though it's not to revert back to the kind of blocks, because blocks in the age of the Cold War, the last Cold War, don't work anymore, and it's in a increasingly, as I said, in the connected world.
Well, I want to bring your attention to what you alluded to in the middle corridor and what comes with that as well. Now, we've seen a lot of deals being made on the sidelines of the UNGA. How do the Central Asian countries align themselves? Are they wary of aligning themselves more with the US, as well as China being more regionally, well, just closer? Are they wary of this? Is this something they would consider when they make deals with Donald Trump?
Well, if you look back in a little bit earlier, say during the past year or 2 years, and there was very little interest in the United States in China's Belt and Road Initiative or in the Middle Corridor. But then President Trump has recently wised up to it, and he's in fact welcomed the President of Azerbaijan and Armenia in the White House, and signing cooperation agreements, but also allowing Americans, giant hedge funds and capitalized companies to take an interest, to take a stake in the Middle Corridor, probably the BlackRock enterprise, suggesting that President Trump has come around to the view that the Middle Corridor represents a strategic interest in the across-the-board competition and rivalry with China for influence and for profits.
And lastly, I just want to get in here. Donald Trump's visit to a potential visit to Uzbekistan has been, the prospects have been raised. Uzbekistan has released a statement saying it could become more likely. How likely could that be from your perspective, and what could that mean for Central Asian regions?
Well, I think that this is quite a high possibility because, as I said, Central Asia is playing a very important role in the global geopolitics. Again, if you look back further in history, when the Western powers rose in the, say, the 16th century or earlier, it was based on sea power, the maritime power. They sent the ships, the navies to conquer territories. And of course, that's later on been explained by the geostrategist, the early geostrategist called Machina, which look at the contest between sea power and also land power, characterized by the term heartland, rimland. Heartland means the Central Asia, Eurasia landmass. And the theory was who as a country have a great influence over the Central Asia landmass, Eurasia. Eurasia, of course, covers both Europe and Central Asia and the rest of Asia, would really have a great influence in the world vis-a-vis the so-called rimland characterized by the maritime powers. But now this dichotomy is not entirely correct because apart from overland or maritime connectivity, you have digital and trade connectivity, which of course doesn't pass through only over land, but also passes through sea lanes of communication. And so I think the Central Asian countries, including Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, are wising up to it. On the one hand, they avoid forming concrete blocks with any particular country, either with China or Russia or the United States. But on the other hand, trying to connect with these great powers around the world. After all, the biggest
Andrew,
market
I do
in the world
apologize.
is still the United States.
I do apologize. We have sadly run out of time. Like the case, I always want to have a longer chat. But thank you very much, and I hope to have you again on soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to AnewZ.